Start spreading the news, people. This is the Righteous Bojambo, and it's time to talk about Frank Sinatra. On June 21st, 1948, Columbia Records president Goddard Lieberson unveiled a product that would revolutionize the music industry and the way people listened to, created, and wrote music from then on until this very day. He unveiled the 33 1/3 RPM long-playing microgroove disc. The LP was born. Both RCA and Columbia had made 33 1/3, 10 and 12-inch discs in the early 1930s, but rapidly withdrew them for technical issues. RCA's discs, for example, had the irritating habit of falling apart after a few plays, cut to ribbons by the special hard needles required to extract sound from them. But Columbia now had a lightweight, unbreakable, good sounding by the standards of the day, medium holding 52 minutes of music for consumers to enjoy, artists to show the full range of their gifts, and composers to expand over. It was, quite simply, a revolutionary and hugely significant day in the history of the classic canon. Before the LP, the two-sided 78 RPM record ruled the market. When these discs first became available, they came in many sizes and speeds, but began to standardise around the 10-inch 78 RPM disc just before World War I. Around the same time, record collectors could buy sturdy cardboard booklets that sleeved 4 to 6 10-inch 78s, and this was called a record album. That term started to drift into desuetude during the Depression, but was resurrected when Columbia put a trademark on the term LP and long-playing record, so album became the default term for any 33 1/3 RPM compilation of 4 or more tracks. Like the compact disc, there's some debate as to what the first LP record was. Technically, the first microgroove LP was a Mendelssohn Concerto in E minor, but that was largely an industry handout thing. But the first widely commercially available record was released on 28th of June 1948, which was called The Voice of Frank Sinatra. 1948 was a bad year for Frank Sinatra. Columbia only booked him for 6 sessions, which resulted in 10 usable songs, some of which weren't very good and none of which appear on The Voice of Frank Sinatra. And apart from the musical Take Me Out to the Ball Game, his music's all bombed and he got terrible reviews, especially for The Kissing Bandit, which was his worst acting performance ever. And his personal life was falling apart. He was carrying on a very public and damaging affair with Ava Gardner, leaving his wife Nancy at home and 7.5 months pregnant. Perhaps Columbia thought that gift wrapping some songs in the old Sinatra style would help repatriate his public image somewhat. The material used for the album comes from sessions held with Alex Stordahl, his old bandmate from Harry James's band. Future collaborator Nelson Riddle was also in the same band. Sinatra sang for 2 major bands, that of Harry James, whom he loved and greatly respected, and Tommy Dorsey. The sessions that yielded this album were held on July 30th, 1945. Someone to Watch Over Me, You Go to My Head, These Foolish Things, and I Don't Know Why. And December the 7th, 1945, Try a Little Tenderness, Ghost of a Chance, Paradise, and Why Shouldn't I? Reviewing a record like this is kind of unique. You can't really apply a lot of the motifs that we usually use to reckon albums by. As the recording equivalent of shovelware, it's not even like listening to a greatest hits album where songs can be placed for impact. For example, the big rocking opener, the huge sing-along closing anthem, or grouped for conceptual purposes. It's purely a historical artifact assembled without concept or agenda, and overall any attempt to apply concept or agenda is either just pareidolia or trying to justify a pre-established conclusion. Not that that matters a feather nor a fig. It's another 5 years before the idea of the conceptually cohesive use of the LP became part of the classic canon. And Sinatra, not by dint of his celebrated In the Wee Small Hours album from 1955, but the first album he cut on Capitol, 1954's Songs for Young Lovers, was a major mover in that regard. The Voice of Frank Sinatra opens with You Go to My Head, nowadays a venerable standard. What immediately strikes you on hearing it is the lack of Sinatra's trademark world-weary tone. Here the voice is just as intimate and warm, but there's no sense of heartbreak in it. Absent is the grit that forms pearls in his phrases, and in its place is a well-controlled but slightly cloying vibrato. Vibrato notwithstanding, there's great merit in the vocals, set as it is against Stordahl's arrangement, which does tend to run a little syrupy in places. Sinatra, now a professional singer for over 7 years, navigates a labyrinthian melody with assurance. It's a very dark melody which seems to always be waiting for change to a minor key that never arrives. And his diction and phrasing are unmistakably his. He's clearly settling into the second phase of his voice, the lighter baritone, which was to darken and roughen as a third phase, the Long Nights Without Ava phase, commenced in 1957. Listening to his 1960 re-recording, the vibrato is still there, much broader but employed more judiciously, and his deeper, sandpapered voice accommodates the trombone-like bends and blue notes that made him famous with Harry James. Track 2 is another, possibly even more well-beloved standard, Someone to Watch Over Me, a song which cries out for an authoritative vocal, as it's all too easy to fall into karaoke territory with it. Sinatra does treat it with more urgency, but alas, only a little less vibrato, getting his teeth into the song and imbuing it with more personality than the preceding track. His diction is a little less tightly reined, and while this is far from jazz, the little flutter up and down the scale at the opening of the final verse could well be a hip little tip to bop. These Foolish Things makes the most of Stordahl's chamber arrangement, and Sinatra makes the most of a clever lyric. The song doesn't approach the heights to which Billie Holiday took it in 1938, where her phrasing and vulnerability took the lyrics to the level of an almost Zen poem. In fact, Sinatra's 1961 re-recording with Stordahl surpasses it. But he was a different man as well as a different voice then. As it stands, this is one of the stronger songs on the album. The next two songs are neither as familiar nor frankly as enjoyable. Cole Porter's Why Shouldn't I and Fred Ailett's and Roy Turk's I Don't Know Why, I Just Do. Aylett and Turk are interesting songwriters. Together they wrote Bing Crosby's When the Blue of the Night Meets the Gold of the Day. Turk wrote the words to what became Elvis Presley's biggest hit, and I still can't believe it's his biggest hit, Are You Lonesome Tonight? And Aylett had a hand in writing I'm Gonna Sit Right Down and Write Myself a Letter. Why Shouldn't I seems to be in too low a key for Sinatra, who battles with the sluggish and linear melody gamely, but isn't helped by some hackneyed lyrics and occasional wobbles in cadence, although he may be trying a repeat of the fluttery scale he used on Someone to Watch Over Me. I Don't Know Why has a very nice arrangement featuring the guitar prominently and has the most upfront drums and bass yet, but that doesn't stop it being too sluggardly a tempo to remain interesting once the weepy strings kick in. Sinatra tries some nice vocal tricks, some very breathy phrasing, and the vibrato is harnessed really well, but it still doesn't really get the song over the line. The rest of the album picks up considerably and is in places excellent. Most remarkable to a fan of music from the rock era is Sinatra's version of Try a Little Tenderness, which is very far removed from the barn burner Otis Redding had taught us to expect. But Sinatra's vocal is splendid. It's the best outing for the kind of quietness at the microphone that he learned from Bing Crosby. The arrangement is simple and direct, and Sinatra sings within himself, concentrating on sincerity and the conversational tone of his diction. It definitely lifts the album out of the slight slough of the two previous tracks. The Bingisms continue with I Don't Stand a Ghost of a Chance with You, one of the songs which I most intimately associate with Sinatra. More, it must be said, through his 1959 re-recording on the Bleak and Lonesome No One Cares album, which Sinatra referred to as a collection of suicide songs. Here, before the raven tresses of the Beatrice of the Carolinas mingled and twined with his hoe-broken heart, he still manages to bridge his adoration of Crosby reflected in his smooth croon. It's always debatable as to whether or not young Sinatra truly could be called a crooner as opposed to a jazz singer, and the volume bends that accentuate his flawless diction and crystal clear phrasing. The swing inflections on the line I thought at last I'd found you and you might discover that I am the lover are subtle and fresh, and the phrasing of the word lover sounds dramatically like the kind of horn-like inflection made most famous on his, in my opinion, signature song, One for My Baby. By the end of what has become a quiet, dreamlike meditation on fate and failure, the bingisms are receding and the Sinatra-tudes have taken over. The final song, Paradise, is very interesting. When I first heard it, I was distinctly underwhelmed, but every time I came back to it, I heard a little more to it, a little more invention, a finer degree of shade between the phrases and the realization that the singer exists outside of the lyric in some preter-existential Traumstadt. It's a song of wishes that the singer knows will never come true, but his only hope lies in holding on to that wish. Stordale's arrangement is perfect, especially the very expressive guitar. You have to listen for it, but it's punchy and it hangs off the beat until the last possible moment and doesn't intrude any of Sinatra's ruminations. With each listening, each reveal, I came to admire this track more and more, to the point where it's probably my favourite on the album. The voice of Frank Sinatra captures the man who, just 2 years before, had been undoubtedly the biggest singing star on the planet, taking his first steps towards true artistic maturity and independence. They aren't entirely confident steps. While Stordale may have been a friend and a trusted partner and had a novel and promising approach towards the work, what his arrangements deliver is occasionally too formal and occasionally too sweetened to fully support the sometimes dark songs Sinatra has chosen. The vibrato is debatable. It may be a vice of Sinatra's that Stordale doesn't rein in, or it may have been encouraged, that is mandated, by the notorious Mitch Miller, who we discussed in TRB 16. But Sinatra, for the most part, picks good songs in his best performances. Someone to Watch Over Me, Try a Little Tenderness, Ghost of a Chance and Paradise are all major waypoints in his development as a singer. All in all, the album is a solid 7 out of 10. And thus was born the era of the LP. It took from 1969 for the LP to finally start to outsell the single, and in 2019 the vinyl LP came back and started to outsell CDs for the first time in 30 years. It's a point we come back to a lot in this series. Music is driven as much or more by economics, social change and technology than by individual genius. The great albums that were to be created down the following decades are all the matter of a talent being best able to adapt itself to one of those three factors. In Sinatra's case, as he began to emerge as the first great artist of the LP era, it was his vision to adapt to technology, coupled with his ability to defy and drive social agenda. I could do 100 videos on Sinatra because, as much as I hate to admit it, Bono was right when he said that Sinatra was the 20th century, or at least 58% of it. Bono's still a knob, but he was right on that occasion. I already started writing 2 new videos just doing this one. I could write a couple on just the way the man wore a hat, for pity's sake. As a talent, he faded, and his peers and imitators swarmed over him and slew him. As a man, though, in spite of faults and flaws uncountable and innumerable, he still stood predominant, a colossus. Even in death, he still does. Guten Morgen, meine Freunde. I hope you found today's presentation to be interesting and that it piqued your curiosity. Let's begin with a small correction. Gotthard Lieberson in 1948 wasn't actually president of Columbia Records. He later became president of Columbia Records, but at the time he was fulfilling some less grandiose duties as a vice president. So, Frank Sinatra. Endless font for comment, opinion, discussion, evaluation. Have a listen to the playlist, preferably with a cool beverage and a plate of biscuits, and add your comments, opinions and points for discussion in the commentary boxes below. So, until the next time we meet together in good company, or until the nasty YouTube police shut this channel down, you all remember to keep it righteous, and all remember that you can't know where you're at until you understand where you've been.